Gerald Gerry. Malcolm Durrell OBE was a British naturalist, zookeeper, conservationist, author and television presenter. He founded what are now called the Durrell Wildlife Conservation Trust and the Durrell Wildlife Park on the Channel Island of Jersey in 1959, but is perhaps best remembered for writing a number of books based on his life as an animal collector and enthusiast. He was the youngest brother of novelist Lawrence Durrell. Early life and education. Durrell was born in Jamshedpur, India on 7 January 1925. He was the fourth and final child of Louisa Florence Dixie and Lawrence Samuel Durrell, both of whom were born in India of English and Irish descent. Durrell's father was a British engineer and, as was commonplace and befitting the family status, the infant Durrell spent most of his time in the company of an Alya. Durrell reportedly recalled his first visit to a zoo in India and attributed his lifelong love of animals to that encounter. The family moved to Britain shortly before the death of his father in 1928 and settled in the Upper Norwood Crystal Palace area of South London. Durrell was enrolled in Wickwood School, but frequently stayed at home feigning illness. Corfu. Mrs. Durrell moved with her three younger children to the Greek island of Corfu in 1935, joining her eldest son, Lawrence, who was living there with his wife. It was on Corfu that Durrell began to collect and keep the local fauna as pets. The family lived on Corfu until 1939. This interval was later the basis of the book My Family and Other Animals and its successors Birds, Beasts, and Relatives and The Garden of the Gods, plus a few short stories such as My Donkey Sally. Durrell was homeschooled during this time by various family friends and private tutors, mostly friends of his eldest brother Lawrence. Theodore Stephanides, a Greek doctor, scientist, poet, philosopher and a friend of one of Durrell's tutors, became Durrell's greatest friend and mentor, his ideas leaving a lasting impression on the young naturalist. Together, they examined Corfu's fauna, which Durrell housed in a variety of items including test tubes and bathtubs. Another major influence during these formative years, according to Durrell, was the writing of French naturalist Jean-Henri Fabre. London and Whipsnade Zoo. Gerald, his mother, his brother Leslie and the Greek maid Maria Kondos moved back to Britain in 1939 at the outbreak of the Second World War. It was difficult to find a job in the war and post-war years, especially for a homeschooled youth, but the enterprising Durrell worked as a helper at an aquarium and pet store. Some of the difficulties that he faced in this period can be found in Fillets of Plice. His call up for the war came in 1943, but he was exempted from military duty on medical grounds, and asked to serve the war effort by working on a farm. After the war, Durrell joined Whipsnade Zoo as a junior student keeper. This move fulfilled a lifelong dream. Durrell claims in the stationery arc that the first word that he could enunciate with any clarity was zoo. Beasts in My Belfry recalls events of this period early animal expeditions. Durrell left Whipsnade Zoo in May 1946 in order to join wildlife collecting expeditions of the time, but was denied a place in the voyages due to his lack of experience. Durrell's wildlife expeditions began with a 1947 trip to the British Cameroons with ornithologist John Yealand, financed by a £3,000 inheritance from his father on the occasion of his turning 21. The animals he brought back were sold to London Zoo, Chester Zoo, Paynton Zoo, Bristol Zoo and Bellevue Zoo. He continued such excursions for many decades, during which time he became famous for his work for wildlife conservation. He followed this successful expedition with two others, accompanied by fellow Whipsnade zookeeper Ken Smith. A repeat trip to the British Cameroon and to British Guiana in 1949 and 1950 respectively. On the first of these trips, he met and befriended the shrewd and colorful phone of Bafata Kirimbi II, an autocratic West African chieftain, who would help him organize future missions. Because of his dedication, Durrell housed and fed his captives with the best supplies obtainable, never over-collecting specimens, never trapping animals having merely show value, or those which would fetch high prices from collectors. These practices differed from those of other animal collecting expeditions of the time, and, as a result, Durrell was broke by the end of his third expedition. Further, due to a falling out with George Cansdale, superintendent at the London Zoo, Durrell was blackballed by the British zoo community and could not secure a job in most zoos, ultimately securing a job at the aquarium at Bellevue Zoo in Manchester, where he remained for some time. On the 26th of February 1951, after an extended courtship, Durrell married Manchester resident Jacqueline Sonia Wolfenden. They eloped. Because of opposition from her father, the couple initially lived in a small bed-sitter in Durrell's sister Margaret's Bournemouth boarding house. Jackie accompanied Durrell on most of his following animal expeditions and helped found and manage the Jersey Zoo. She also authored 2 humorous best-selling memoirs on the lines of Durrell's books, to raise money for conservation efforts, with encouragement and assistance from Jackie, and advice from elder brother Lawrence. Gerald Durrell started writing humorous autobiographical accounts to raise money, initially because he and Jackie were broke after the wedding and Durrell didn't have a source of income, and then later to fund his expeditions and conservation efforts. His first book, The Overloaded Ark, was a huge success, causing Durrell to follow up with other such accounts. While Durrell only made £50 from British rights, he obtained £500 from the United States rights for the book, and thus managed to raise money for a 4th expedition to South America in 1954. This, however, was undertaken during a political coup d'état in Paraguay and was unsuccessful. Foundations for the Jersey Zoo. The publication of My Family and Other Animals in 1956 made Durrell a notable author and brought him public recognition as a naturalist. Royalties from this book, which made bestseller lists in the United Kingdom, helped to fund Durrell's next expedition. Durrell's growing disillusionment with the way zoos of the time were run, and his belief that they should primarily act as reserves and regenerators of endangered species, made him contemplate founding his own zoo. His 1957 trip to Cameroon for the third and last time was primarily to collect animals which would form the core collection of his own zoo. This expedition was also filmed, it being Durrell's first experiment with making a cinematographic record of his work with animals. The success of the film To Buffet with Beagles, together with his autobiographical radio program Encounters with Animals, made Durrell a regular with the BBC Natural History Unit for decades to come, as well as generating funds for his conservation projects. On his return from Buffet, Durrell and wife Jackie stayed with his sister Margaret at her boarding house in the seaside resort of Bournemouth. His animals were housed in her gardens and garage on a temporary basis, while Durrell sought prospective sites for a zoo. To his dismay, both Bournemouth and Poole municipalities turned down his suggestion for a zoo. This experience provided material for his book A Zoo in My Luggage. The Zoo and the Trust. Durrell founded the Jersey Zoological Park in 1959 to house his growing collection of animals. The site for the zoo, a 17th-century manor house, Les Augres Manor, came to Durrell's notice by chance after a long and unsuccessful search for a suitable site. Durrell leased the manor and set up his zoo on the redesigned manor grounds. In the same year, Durrell undertook another, more successful expedition to South America to collect endangered species. The zoo was opened to the public in 1959 on the 26th of March. As the zoo grew in size, so did the number of projects undertaken to save threatened wildlife in other parts of the world. Durrell was instrumental in founding the Jersey Wildlife Preservation Trust on 6 July 1963 to cope with the increasingly difficult challenges of zoo, wildlife and habitat management. The trust opened an international wing, the Wildlife Preservation Trust International, in the United States in 1971, to aid international conservation efforts in a better fashion. That year, the trust bought out Les Augres Manor from its owner, Major Hugh Fraser, giving the zoo a permanent home. Durrell's initiative caused the Fauna and Flora Preservation Society to start the World Conference on Breeding Endangered Species in Captivity as an aid to the survival in 1972 at Jersey. Today one of the most prestigious conferences in the field. 1972 also saw Princess Anne becoming a patron of the trust, an action which brought the trust into media limelight and helped raise funds. The 1970s saw Jersey Wildlife Preservation Trust become a leading zoo in the field of captive breeding, championing the cause amongst species like the lowland gorilla and various Mauritian fauna. Durrell visited Mauritius several times and coordinated large-scale conservation efforts in Mauritius, involving captive breeding programs for native birds and reptiles, ecological recovery of Round Island, training local staff, and setting up local in situ and ex situ conservation facilities. This ultimately led to the founding of the Mauritian Wildlife Foundation in 1984. Jackie Durrell separated from and then divorced Gerald Durrell in 1979, citing his increasing work pressure, associated alcoholism and mounting stress as causes. Durrell met his second wife Lee McGeorge Durrell in 1977 when he lectured at Duke University, where she was studying for a PhD in animal communication. They married in 1979. She co-authored a number of books with him, including The Amateur Naturalist, and became the honorary director of the trust after his death. In 1978, Durrell started the Training Center for Conservationists at the zoo, or the mini-university, in his words. As of 2005, over 1,000 biologists, naturalists, zoo veterinarians and zoo architects from 104 countries have attended the International Training Center. Durrell was also instrumental in forming the Captive Breeding Specialist Group of the World Conservation Union in 1982. Durrell founded Wildlife Preservation Trust Canada, now Wildlife Preservation Canada, in 1985. The official appeal Saving Animals from Extinction was launched in 1991, at a time when British zoos were not faring well and London Zoo was in danger of closing down. In 1989, Durrell and his wife Lee, along with David Attenborough and cricketer David Gower, helped launch the World Land Trust. The initial goal of the trust was to purchase rainforest land in Belize as part of the program for Belize. Around this time, Gerald Durrell developed a friendship with Charles Rycroft, who became an important donor of funds both for building works in Jersey and for conservation work in East Africa, Madagascar and elsewhere. 1990 saw the trust establish a conservation program in Madagascar along the lines of the Mauritius program. Durrell visited Madagascar in 1990 to start captive breeding of a number of endemic species like the ii. Durrell chose the dodo, the flightless bird of Mauritius that was hunted to extinction in the 17th century, as the logo for both the Jersey Zoo and the Trust. The children's chapter of the Trust is called the Dodo Club. Following his death, the Jersey Wildlife Preservation Trust was renamed Durrell Wildlife Conservation Trust at the 40th anniversary of the zoo on 26 March 1999. The Wildlife Preservation Trust International also changed its name to Wildlife Trust in 2000, and adopted the logo of the black tamarin. To me, if an animal species is a criminal offense, in the same way as the destruction of anything we cannot recreate or replace, such as a Rembrandt of the Acropolis. Later life and death. A hard, outdoor life led Durrell to health problems in the 1980s. He underwent hip replacement surgery in a bid to counter arthritis, but he also suffered from alcohol-related liver problems. His health deteriorated rapidly after the 1990 Madagascar trip. Durrell had a liver transplant in King's College Hospital on the 28th of March 1994, and he died of septicemia on the 30th of January 1995, shortly after his 70th birthday in Jersey General Hospital. His ashes are buried in Jersey Zoo under a memorial plaque bearing a quote by William Beebe. The beauty and genius of a work of art may be reconceived, though its first material expression be destroyed. A vanished harmony may yet again inspire the composer, but when the last individual of a race of living beings breathes no more, another heaven and another earth must pass before such a one can be again. A memorial celebrating Durrell's life and work was held at the Natural History Museum in London on the 28th of June 1995. Participants included personal friends such as David Attenborough and Princess Anne. Policy for zoos. Gerald Durrell was ahead of his time when he postulated the role that a 20th-century zoo should play, primarily in stationary art. His idea relies on the following bases. The primary purpose of a zoo should be to act as a reserve of critically endangered species which need captive breeding in order to survive. They can serve the secondary purposes of educating people about wildlife and natural history, and of educating biologists about the animal's habits. Zoos should not be run for the purposes of entertainment only, and non-threatened species should be reintroduced into the natural habitats. An animal should be present in the zoo only as a last resort, when all efforts to save it in the wild have failed. Durrell's ideas about housing zoo animals also brings his priorities to the fore. The bases on which enclosures at Jersey are built. Enclosures should be built keeping in mind, firstly, the comfort of the animal, secondly, for the convenience of the animal keeper, and finally for the viewing comfort of visitors. The size of an enclosure should depend on how large the territories might be. The companions of an animal should reflect not only ecological niche and biogeographic concerns, but its social abilities as well, how well it gets on with other members of its species and other species. Every animal deserves food of its choice, sometimes made interesting by variation, and a mate of its choice, and a nice and interesting environment. Durrell Wildlife Park was the first zoo to house only endangered breeding species, and has been one of the pioneers in the field of captive breeding. The International Training Center and the organization of the Conference on Captive Breeding are also notable firsts. Durrell initially faced stiff opposition and criticism from some members of the zoo community when he introduced the idea of captive breeding, and was only vindicated after successfully breeding a wide range of species. One of the most active opposition members was George Cansdale, superintendent of the London Zoo in Zoological Society of London, and wielder of considerable influence in the zoo community. Books. Durrell's books, both fiction and non-fiction, have a wry, loose style that poked fun at himself as well as those around him. Perhaps his best-known work is My Family and Other Animals, which tells of his idyllic, if oddball, childhood on Corfu, later made into a TV series. It is delightfully deprecating about the whole family, especially elder brother Lawrence, who became a famous novelist. Despite Durrell's jokes at the expense of brother Larry, the two were close friends all their lives. Gerald Durrell always insisted that he wrote for royalties to help the cause of environmental stewardship, not out of an inherent love for writing. Gerald Durrell describes himself as a writer in comparison to his brother Lawrence. The subtle difference between us is that he loves writing and I don't. To me it's simply a way to make money which enables me to do my animal work, nothing more. However, he shows a surprising diversity and dexterity in a wide variety of writing, including autobiographical accounts. Most of his works are of such kind, characterized by a love for nature and animals, dry wit, crisp descriptions and humorous analogies of human beings with animals and vice versa. The most famous of these is the Corfu trilogy, My Family and Other Animals, Birds, Beasts and Relatives, and The Garden of the Gods. Short stories, often bordering on the Roald Dahl-esque, like Michelin Man, Picnic and such like Pandemonium. The latter also has an acclaimed Gothic horror story titled The Entrance. Marrying Off Mother and Other Stories also has a few short stories. Novels. Durrell's only two novels for adults are Rosie is My Relative, a story about a bequeathed elephant which Durrell claimed is based on real-life events, and The Mockery Bird, the fable based loosely on the story of Mauritius and the dodo. Technical essays. The Stationary Ark is a collection of technical essays on zookeeping and conservation. Guides. The Amateur Naturalist is the definitive guide for a budding naturalist over the last 20 years. Novels for older children. The Donkey Rustlers is set on a Greek island, and The Talking Parcel is a tale of children at large in a land of mythological creatures. Natural history books for children. The New Noah is a collection of encounters with animals from Durrell's previous expeditions, written with children in mind. Stories for younger children. Keeper. Toby the Tortoise, The Fantastic Dinosaur Adventure and The Fantastic Flying Journey are lavishly illustrated stories. Board and picture books. The board book series Puppy Stories are for infants, and the picture book Island Zoo is for young children about the first animals in Jersey Zoo. Durrell was also a regular contributor to magazines on both sides of the Atlantic like Harper's, Atlantic Monthly and the Sunday Times Supplement. He was also a regular book reviewer for the New York Times. A number of excerpts and stories from his books were used by Octopus Books and Reader's Digest Publishing, including in the Reader's Digest condensed books. Durrell's works have been translated into 31 languages and made into TV serials and feature films. He has a large followings in Northern and Eastern Europe, Russia, Israel and in various Commonwealth countries, including India. The British Library houses a collection of Durrell's books, presented by him to Alan G. Thomas as part of the Lawrence Durrell collection. Illustrators. Durrell was a talented artist and caricaturist, but worked with numerous illustrators over the years, starting with Sabine Bohr for The Overloaded Ark. Two of his most productive collaborations were with Ralph Thompson and Edward Mortelmans. The illustrations are mostly sketches of animal subjects. Ralph Thompson visited the Jersey Zoological Park during the sketching period for Menagerie Manor. Other illustrators who worked with Durrell were Barry L. Driscoll, who illustrated Two in the Bush, Pat Marriott, who illustrated Look at Zoos, and Anmieki Van Ogtrop, who illustrated The Talking Parcel and Donkey Rustlers. Durrell wrote a number of lavishly illustrated children's books in his later years. Graham Percy was the illustrator for The Fantastic Flying Journey and The Fantastic Dinosaur Adventure. Toby the Tortoise and Keeper were illustrated by Keith West. His puppy board books were illustrated by Cliff Wright. Honors and Legacy. Durrell was awarded the Order of the Golden Ark by Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands in 1981. Durrell received the OBE in 1982. The National Youth Music Theatre performed the musical theatre The Carnival of the Animals at Fort Regent, Jersey as a tribute to Gerald Durrell in 1984. Durrell featured in the United Nations Roll of Honor for Environmental Achievement in 1988, becoming part of 500 people to be given this honor in the period 1987 to 92. The University of Kent started the Durrell Institute of Conservation and Ecology in 1989, the first graduate school in the United Kingdom to offer degrees and diplomas in conservation and biodiversity. The journal Biodiversity and Conservation brought out a special volume of their journal in tribute to Gerald Durrell, on the theme of the role of zoos. In 1995, following his death, the Gerald Durrell Memorial Funds, launched in 1996, are granted in the field of conservation by the Wildlife Trust every year. The Statue Park in Miscolch Zoo created a bust of Gerald Durrell in 1998. Whipsnade Zoo also unveiled a new island for housing primates dedicated to Durrell in 1998. The Wildlife Photographer of the Year competition, owned by the Natural History Museum and BBC Wildlife, gives the Gerald Durrell Award for the best photograph of an endangered species, starting from 2001. The Durrell School in Corfu, established in 2002, offers an academic course and tours in the footsteps of the Durrells in Corfu. Botanist David Bellamy has conducted field trips in Corfu for the school. The Town Hall of Corfu announced in 2006 that it would rename Corfu Boschetto Durrell, after Gerald and Lawrence Durrell as a mark of respect. Wildlife Preservation Canada established the Gerald Durrell Society in 2006 as recognition for individuals who have made legacy gifts. The Gerald Durrell Endemic Wildlife Sanctuary in the Black River Valley in Mauritius is the home of the Mauritius Wildlife Appeal Fund's immensely successful captive breeding program for the Mauritius kestrel, pink pigeon and echo parakeet. The Durrell Wildlife Park has a bronze statue of Gerald Durrell by John Doubleday, cast along with a rough lemur at his knee and a round island gecko at his feet. Jersey brought out stamps honoring the Jersey Wildlife Preservation Trust, and Mauritius brought out a stamp based on a race of a rare gecko named after Durrell. The de-identification of Rat Island in St. Lucia by the Durrell Wildlife Conservation Trust to create a sanctuary for the St. Lucia whiptail lizard on the lines of Praslin Island has caused an official change in name for Rat Island. It is in the process of being renamed Durrell Island. The Visitors Center at the Belize Zoo was named the Gerald Durrell Visitors Center in honor of Durrell. Numerous individual animals of rare species born in captivity have been named Gerry or Gerald as homage to Durrell. Among them the first Aldabra giant tortoise born in captivity. Cornwall College Newquay Center for Applied Zoology has two buildings. One, the Durrell Building, opened by his wife Lee Durrell in 2007. Species and homages Salanoi durrelli, a carnivorous species related to the brown-tailed mongoose, from Lake Aleotra, Madagascar. Centraline durellorum, a glass frog of the family Centralinidae from the eastern Andean foothills of Ecuador, discovered in 2002 and described in 2005. This frog was named in honor of Gerald Durrell and his wife Lee Durrell for the contributions to the conservation of global biodiversity. Clarkia durrelli, a fossil brachiopods of the order Atripida from the Upper Silurian age, discovered 1982. There is presently no reference to indicate that this species was named in honor of Gerald Durrell. Nactis serpensinsula durellorum, the round island race of the serpent island gecko, is a distinct subspecies and was named after both Gerald and Lee Durrell for the contribution to saving the gecko and round island fauna in general. Mauritius released a stamp depicting the race. Celondelphusa durrelli, Durrell's freshwater crab, a critically rare new species of Sri Lankan freshwater crab. Benthophilus durrelli, Durrell's tadpole goby, a new species of tadpole goby discovered in 2004. Kochevnik Durrelli Yakovlev, a new species of moth of the superfamily Cossoidea from Russia. Mahi Durrelli came in 2005, a new species of shield bug of the family Acanthosomatidae from Madagascar. Major expeditions.